He was just a man with calloused hands and a guarded heart, but one accidental encounter had her believing he was a billionaire CEO. She fell in love with the fantasy, never realizing the truth would break them both before it saved them. Like and subscribe for more explosive romance stories where secrets ignite passion and truth tests the heart. Emily Carter never spilled coffee. Not when she was running late, not when she was multitasking 3 client calls, and certainly not when she was about to land the biggest campaign of her career. But that morning, as the summer heat shimmered off the downtown pavement and traffic honked in discordant chorus, Emily collided with someone the exact moment she rounded the corner of Grand and Sycamore. The paper cup flew from her hand, a hot arc of dark roast splashing across a crisp white shirt and a firm chest beneath it. She gasped as the lid popped off, the liquid spreading like a stain of guilt. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," she blurted, already fumbling in her bag for tissues she was sure she didn't have. The man in front of her took a step back, but instead of reacting with annoyance or irritation, he smiled. A real smile, not the kind people wore at networking events or during uncomfortable elevator rides. His expression was almost amused, like she had just done something unexpected and charming instead of clumsy and caffeinated. "It's just a shirt," he said, taking the brunt of the damage without a flicker of frustration. His voice was low and even, a grounded tone that caught her attention even more than his broad shoulders or tanned forearms. Emily finally located a napkin from a granola bar she had eaten yesterday and tried dabbing uselessly at his shirt. This was probably designer or something. "I really am sorry." "Not even close," he said with a half-laugh. "Trust me, this thing's seen worse." She paused then, really looking at him. He was tall, with rough stubble across his jaw and hair that was just a little too long to be styled into anything corporate. Still, he carried himself with a kind of quiet confidence, like a man used to making decisions that mattered. His shirt, while now soaked in coffee, was a button-down, untucked over jeans that somehow looked intentional. No logo, no badge, no hint of who he actually was. Behind him, the mirrored glass of the Halberton building reflected the mid-morning sun. She glanced at the time on her phone and swore under her breath. "Are you headed in there?" she asked, gesturing toward the sliding doors behind him. "Yeah," he said, after the smallest pause. "Something like that." "Well, if you're going to be late, feel free to tell whoever you're meeting that a very clumsy woman from Viridian Marketing attacked you with hot coffee." He grinned again. "Will do." She wasn't sure why, but something about the way he looked at her made her stomach flutter. He didn't glance at his watch or scan her name badge. He didn't do that thing most men did when they were deciding whether or not she was worth talking to. He just stood there, solid and steady, like she hadn't thrown his morning into chaos. "I'm Emily," she offered, holding out her hand before realizing it was also damp with coffee, "and I'm probably going to regret not carrying extra napkins." He took her hand anyway, warm and calloused, the kind of grip that told her he worked with his hands, not just a keyboard. "Jake," he said. "Nice to meet you, Emily." The way he said her name made her want to hear it again. There was a brief lull. People passed by them in waves, phones to ears, earbuds in place, expensive shoes tapping across the concrete. Emily felt suddenly suspended in a bubble, the noise muted, the moment oddly vivid. "Well, Jake," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, "I should probably go make a case for why a tech company needs to be emotionally resonant. Apparently, that's controversial." Jake nodded, his expression unreadable for a second. Then he said, "Good luck. And for what it's worth, emotional resonance sounds a lot more useful than most things that go on in that building. Coming from a man in a coffee-stained shirt, I'll take that as high praise. Let me walk you in," he offered suddenly. "You might need someone to vouch for you when you arrive smelling like French roast." She hesitated only a second before nodding. They stepped into the building together, the cool air of the lobby washing over them like a reset. The receptionist gave them both a cursory glance before buzzing her through. Jake didn't stop to check in, but he seemed to know exactly where he was going. As they reached the elevator, she turned to him. "This is me," she said, nodding toward the floor number. Jake glanced at the panel. "Fancy floor, must be important." "More like a glorified pitch machine," she said, but smiled anyway. The elevator doors slid open. She hesitated in front of them, not wanting the moment to end, not really knowing why. Jake caught her gaze again. "Thanks for the coffee." "Any time," she said, stepping inside. The doors began to close. Just before they shut completely, Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, sliding it through the narrowing gap like some romantic sleight of hand. She caught it. The card was blank on one side. On the other, in simple lettering, it said, "Jake Mason, Consulting, Design." No logo, no company name, no title, just enough to be mysterious. By the time she looked up, he was gone. Emily clutched the card a little tighter than necessary. As the elevator climbed, she wondered what kind of consulting he did, and why her heart was racing after only 5 minutes with a man whose shirt she had ruined. Whatever his story was, she had a feeling it was more interesting than half the pitch decks she would see that day, and she wanted to hear the rest of it. Jake Mason stared at the small coffee voucher in his hand, his fingers smudging the edges as he turned it over again. It was tucked inside a neatly folded note, scrawled in handwriting that was both efficient and warm. "To the man I nearly scalded coffee on me next time. Thank you for being unexpectedly kind." It was signed simply Emily. He sat on the tailgate of his pickup truck, parked along the edge of a side alley behind the Halberton building, boots resting on the curb, sweat clinging to the back of his neck. Around him, the city buzzed on as if nothing had changed, but inside his chest, something odd had shifted. That woman, Emily, with her sharp words and softer smile, had appeared out of nowhere and left behind a kind of ache he hadn't felt in years. Jake exhaled and looked up toward the top of the building. He had spent the morning finishing a stone path through the rooftop garden that nobody ever really looked at unless they needed a backdrop for investor photos. It paid well enough, and work was work, but today he found himself distracted. He kept remembering the way she had looked at him, like he belonged there, like he fit in with those polished men in tailored suits. It had been a mistake, of course. A simple misunderstanding. She thought he worked in the building, probably as one of those faceless executives in glass offices who signed contracts without reading them. He had meant to correct her, really, but then she had started laughing, wiping coffee off his shirt, and he had said the wrong thing. Or maybe he had said nothing, which was worse. She assumed. He let her. And now, sitting here with his voucher and her note burning in his pocket, Jake was half annoyed with himself for not being honest, and half amazed that someone like her had even bothered to remember him at all. He stood, stretching his back, feeling the familiar twinge from years of hauling sod and laying brick. He would throw the voucher away. That was the smart thing. Let it be a moment, a single exchange on a hot morning. Let her keep the version of him that existed only for 5 minutes in a marble lobby. Instead, he folded the note back along its crease and slid it into his wallet. Later that night, after Lily had finally fallen asleep beneath a tangle of blankets and stuffed animals, Jake sat at the small kitchen table in his 2-bedroom rental, fiddling with his laptop. He Googled Viridian Marketing. The website was sleek, all bold fonts and branded language, and there she was, 4th from the top on the team page. Emily Carter, Senior Brand Strategist. Her photo was professional, confident, but there was a hint of the same warmth he had seen in person. He clicked away from it almost immediately. His sister, Beth, leaned against the kitchen counter, sipping tea and watching him with that knowing expression she had honed since they were teenagers. She raised an eyebrow. "Who's the woman?" Jake gave her a look. "No one." Beth walked over and looked at the laptop. "That's no one? She's definitely someone. I met her this morning. She spilled coffee on me." Beth laughed. "That's one way to start a love story." "It's not a story. She thought I was someone else. Some big-shot executive. I didn't have time to correct her. And then I didn't bother correcting her at all. Beth's eyes softened. Jake. I know. He closed the laptop. His hands, still calloused and stained faintly with soil, rubbed over his face. He hadn't lied, not really, but he hadn't told the truth either. And now he had a coffee voucher from a woman who probably thought she was flirting with a man who had a corner office and 3 assistants. Beth sat across from him and took another sip of her tea. So what are you going to do? Jake shrugged. Throw it away. Forget it happened. But he didn't. The next day, when he arrived at the rooftop with his tools and gear, he passed by the Halberton Building's lobby again. His hands were dirty, his shirt damp from the early morning humidity, and yet he hesitated by the entrance. A security guard looked at him, unimpressed. Jake smiled slightly and kept walking. He didn't stop thinking about her. He thought about the way she had said her name, the flash of embarrassment that had passed through her eyes, and how quickly she had masked it with humor. He liked her laugh, the way it caught him off guard. It was 3 days before the email arrived. The subject line was, "Redemption and Caffeine." The message was short. Hi, Jake. Hope the shirt survived. Still owe you a cup of coffee. Want to cash in that voucher? Emily. He read it twice, heart thudding with a strange combination of dread and anticipation. She had found his email on the back of the business card. A card that said nothing, really, just his name and the words, "Consulting Design." It wasn't a lie. He did landscape design. It just wasn't the kind of consulting she probably thought it was. Jake typed a reply, then deleted it, started again, settled on something simple. Would love to, just name the place. They met 2 days later at a small cafe tucked between a used bookstore and a flower shop. It was the kind of place with chipped mugs and scones that tasted like someone's grandmother still made them. Jake arrived early and sat by the window, fingers drumming lightly against the wood grain of the table. When Emily walked in, he stood, unsure if that was what people still did. She smiled when she saw him, pushing sunglasses onto her head. "Still standing," she said as she sat down. "That's a good sign." Jake smiled. No serious injuries from the coffee burn. They ordered, talked about the weather, the city, the upcoming heat wave. Nothing too deep. She asked questions about his work, and he answered in vague, technically accurate terms. Landscape design, consulting for private and corporate projects. She didn't press, and he didn't elaborate. And still, the conversation flowed, easy and natural. She had a way of listening that made him feel heard, even when he wasn't saying much, and he noticed how her eyes lit up when she talked about branding strategy, as if it were more than just logos and buzzwords. She talked about storytelling like it mattered. When they finished their coffee, Jake walked her to the corner. The sun was setting behind the high-rises, painting the sidewalk in amber tones. "I'm glad you emailed," he said, meaning it. "I almost didn't," she replied. "Wasn't sure if you'd think it was weird." "I didn't," he said. "Still don't." She paused, studying his face, then gave a slight nod. "Next time? Dinner?" Jake felt the twist in his stomach again, part thrill, part fear. "Sure," he said. "Next time." As she walked away, he felt the familiar weight of truth press against him. He hadn't lied, but the silence between them was growing louder. Still, he watched her go and felt something he hadn't in a long time. Hope, warm, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. Jake tugged at the collar of his borrowed suit. The fabric itched at his neck, and the sleeves were half an inch too short, revealing his wrist every time he moved. His sister Beth had fished the outfit from a dry cleaner's clearance rack 2 years ago, claiming one day he might need to look like someone who had a reason to walk into places with chandeliers. Tonight, apparently, was that night. He stood at the edge of the hotel ballroom, watching the swirl of tailored elegance before him. The air buzzed with clinking glasses, murmured introductions, and the low hum of live jazz. Crystal lights hung overhead like suspended galaxies, casting soft gold over the faces of the city's brightest and most self-assured. Jake had never seen so many designer labels in one room. It was as if wealth and confidence were scented cologne here, sprayed generously and worn like armor. Emily appeared near the entrance, and suddenly the entire room lost focus. She wore a dress the color of deep wine, smooth and elegant, with a subtle shimmer that caught the light each time she moved. Her hair was swept up, a few strands falling around her face, in a way that was effortless and intentional at once. When her eyes found him, her smile reached him like a bridge. Just like that, his nerves stilled. "You clean up well," she said as she walked toward him, her heels tapping softly against the polished floor. He held out a hand as if they were about to dance, half teasing. "So do you." She laughed and linked her arm through his. "Come on, let's get drinks before someone corners me about influencer metrics." Jake let himself be led, grateful for the anchor of her presence. She was at ease here. This was her world, where deals were made over Pinot Noir and reputations were built on confidence. He felt like a visitor, an imposter wearing someone else's clothes and language. But with her beside him, it was easier to pretend. They took their drinkshires a white wine, his a bourbon he didn't quite like, and wandered toward the edges of the ballroom where the lights were dimmer and conversations less intense. She introduced him to a few colleagues in passing, though most of them were already halfway into their next anecdote before he could speak. Still, he nodded, smiled, and said little. It seemed to be enough. After a while, the band struck up a slower tune, and the dance floor thinned. Emily turned toward him with a raised brow. "Do you dance, Mr. Consulting and Design?" Jake smiled. "Not well." "That's not a no." "No, it's not." She let him out again, her hand warm in his, and placed his other hand on her waist. The song was soft, and they swayed without urgency. Her body fit against his like something remembered. Jake hadn't danced in years, not since before Lily was born, but here, with her, it was easy to forget all the things he had left behind. She looked up at him, her eyes thoughtful. "You know, I still don't know much about you." Jake hesitated. "What do you want to know? Where you grew up? Why you chose design? What your favorite ice cream is? The important stuff." He smiled, grateful for the ease in her voice. "Small town up north. Fell into design after trying everything else. And mint chip, obviously." She laughed. "Okay, that one I accept. But don't think you're getting away without the rest." "Fair enough," he said. "Another time?" Her eyes searched his for a moment, then she nodded. "Another time." But not everyone was content to leave the mystery alone. As they stepped off the dance floor, a man approached. He was tall, with sandy blonde hair and the kind of confidence that came from too many closed-door meetings. His tailored suit was so precise it looked like it had been measured by lasers. He carried a drink in one hand and a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Emily," he said smoothly, "didn't expect to see you here tonight." She stiffened slightly. "David, thought you moved to San Francisco." David's eyes slid over to Jake, who extended a polite hand. "Jake Mason." David shook it, his grip too firm, his eyes narrowing just a little. "Nice to meet you. Emily's +1?" Jake nodded, offering nothing more. David turned back to Emily. "Still, finding talent in unlikely places, I see." "Still pretending your MBA makes you interesting?" she replied with a sweet smile. David chuckled, but there was tension in his jaw. "So what firm are you with, Jake?" Jake took a breath. "Independent. I run my own operation, small design consulting firm." David tilted his head. "Interesting. You don't look like a consultant." Jake felt the weight behind the words. His hands, though cleaned, bore the memory of years of physical work. His posture was straight, but not practiced. He lacked the polish that men like David wore as a second skin. I get that sometimes, Jake said calmly. Emily stepped in before David could continue. Excuse us. Jake promised me a second dance. She pulled Jake away before more questions could follow. As they crossed the room, she looked up at him. You okay? Jake nodded. Fine. He's harmless, just irritating. Jake didn't answer. The questions had rattled something inside him. He could feel the lie stretching thin, a thread tugged too many times. He had wanted to tell her tonight, to explain everything. But then she had smiled at him, asked him to dance, and the moment had passed like smoke. Outside the ballroom, they found a quieter terrace, lined with planters and soft string lights. The city pulsed in the distance, glass and metal catching the moonlight. Jake leaned on the railing, trying to calm the tightness in his chest. Emily stood beside him, her voice quiet. You don't have to impress anyone, you know. Not me, not them. He turned to look at her. Her eyes were kind but searching. She was giving him a chance, he realized. An opening. I'm not who you think I am, he said. She tilted her head. What do you mean? Jake hesitated. He opened his mouth, but the words lodged behind his teeth. He saw her waiting, patient, trusting, and all he could think of was Lily, asleep at home, and the bills that waited unopened on the kitchen table. This moment, this illusion, was the first thing in a long time that felt untouched by struggle. So instead, he smiled softly and said, I just mean I don't care what they think. I care what you think. She studied him a moment longer, then stepped closer. Her hand found his. Then you're doing just fine. They stood there for a long time, the city below them and something fragile blooming between them. Jake knew the truth would have to come soon, but not tonight. Tonight, for just a little while longer, he wanted to be the man she saw when she looked at him, the one who could dance and smile and belong. Jake stood at the edge of the botanical gardens, watching the breeze stir the long grasses near the pond. The soft hush of leaves was the only sound, as though nature itself had quieted to make room for what he needed to say. His palms were damp, and he wiped them discreetly on his jeans as he waited. He had arrived early, not trusting himself to be late for something this important. He had rehearsed the words on the drive over, shaping them in his mind, sanding them down so they wouldn't come out rough or clumsy. He was ready. He had to be. Emily arrived just after 6. She wore a light blue dress that fluttered at her knees, and her smile when she saw him came easily. She walked toward him like they had known each other forever, like this was just another chapter in a story already being written. Hey, she said, stopping in front of him. You look like a man on the edge of a decision. He laughed, though his heart knocked hard in his chest. Something like that. She tilted her head, studying him. Should I be worried? Jake opened his mouth, ready to confess everything. He had played along too long. Every day that passed added weight to the truth, and tonight was the only time he could lift it off them. He could not keep pretending to be the man she thought he was. She deserved honesty. She deserved someone who didn't need to rewrite himself to fit into her life. But before he could speak, she reached for his hand. Can we walk first? She asked. There's something I want to tell you, too. He swallowed the words and nodded. They moved along the gravel path side by side, surrounded by summer flowers blooming in bursts of orange and red. The scent of lavender drifted through the air, calming and sweet. Children laughed in the distance, and the sun, still lingering just above the horizon, cast everything in a warm gold. Emily's fingers curled around his as they walked. I brought a guy here once, she said, glancing ahead. Years ago, first boyfriend after college. He said it was boring. Jake glanced at her. I can't imagine anyone saying that to you. She smiled faintly. He was one of those types who liked loud restaurants and louder opinions. I think I was trying to turn him into someone he wasn't. Jake was silent, not knowing yet where she was going. She continued. After we broke up, I came back here by myself. I sat by the lily pond and tried to figure out why I kept choosing the same kind of man. Smart, ambitious, confident, sure, but also cold, polished to the point of being untouchable. And I realized I didn't want someone perfect. I wanted someone real. He felt a sharp pull in his chest. It would be so easy to say it then, to answer her truth with his own. But before he could open his mouth again, she went on. You're different, Jake. You don't try to impress me. You don't act like you have something to prove. You're just you. He stopped walking. She turned to him, her face open, hopeful. Emily, he said, gently pulling her hand into both of his. There's something I need to. I'm not finished, she said, her voice quiet. Can I just say this? He nodded, stunned into silence. I've never felt this calm with someone. That probably sounds boring, but it's not. It's rare. It's real. And I think that's what I've been looking for all this time. Someone who doesn't care about appearances or politics or making every moment a competition. Someone who looks at me and sees me. Jake's throat tightened. Her words were everything he had hoped to be. But they weren't true. At least not the way she believed. She didn't know the full story. She didn't know that he was lying to her with every second he let her keep thinking he was someone he wasn't. She leaned in and kissed him then. Her lips brushed his gently. A kiss that asked a question and offered an answer all at once. It was warm and hesitant, full of possibility. When she pulled back, her eyes searched his. What were you going to say? Jake hesitated. The truth hovered on the edge of his mouth. It would change everything. It might ruin this fragile thing between them before it had a chance to bloom. He thought of Lily, of his business, barely holding together, of the man he actually was. And then he thought of the way Emily looked at him right now, like he was already enough. He let the moment pass. Just that this is the best I've felt in a long time, he said softly. She smiled, the kind of smile that made him feel like he had been chosen. They continued walking through the gardens, stopping now and then to admire a fountain or to read the nameplates of rare plants. Emily told him about her childhood dog, a beagle named Max, who once got his head stuck in a railing for 2 hours. Jake told her about the time Lily tried to microwave a crayon and filled the house with purple smoke. They laughed. They talked. They kissed again beneath the archway of flowering vines. Later, as he drove home with the windows down, the cool night air brushing against his face, Jake felt the weight of what he hadn't said settle back onto his shoulders. He had missed his chance. Or maybe he had chosen not to take it. He wasn't sure which was worse. At home, the house was quiet. Beth had put Lily to bed and left a note on the kitchen counter. She drew you a picture. It's on the fridge. Look closely. You have 3 arms. Jake smiled faintly and crossed the kitchen. The drawing was taped crookedly to the fridge door. A stick figure with wild brown hair stood next to a smaller stick figure with a speech bubble that said, "Dad is my hero." He stared at it, feeling both hollow and full. How could he be anyone's hero when he couldn't even tell the truth to the one person who deserved it most? He poured himself a glass of water and sat at the table, the house creaking softly around him. Outside, the city buzzed in the distance. He closed his eyes and tried to picture a future where this lie didn't follow him like a shadow. But no matter how he shaped it in his mind, the truth waited. And one way or another, it would not wait forever. The days after their kiss passed in a quiet, glowing blur. Jake found himself waking up with the kind of energy he hadn't felt in years. His mornings began before sunrise as always, packing Lily's lunch and laying out her school clothes, but now even the small things felt sharper, more purposeful. He still had the same work orders and invoices to chase down. He still had bills that arrived with their usual ruthless punctuality. But beneath the weight of his everyday life, something new had taken root. It was the feeling of being wanted, not for what he could fix or what he could provide, but simply for being seen. He and Emily texted constantly, the kind of back and forth that picked up easily from any silence. They sent photos of their lunches, inside jokes about terrible client slogans, even song lyrics that made them think of each other. When their schedules allowed, they met after work for quick walks or long dinners. Jake found himself talking more, opening up about things he usually kept locked away. Not the whole truth, not yet, but pieces of it. Things about his mother's garden, about how he used to build tree houses for the neighborhood kids, about how he always found peace in the dirt. Emily listened like every word mattered. Still, the truth he had buried sat quietly between them, growing heavier the more time passed. Jake knew it could not be ignored forever. One Thursday evening, Emily called him out of the blue. "Dinner, tomorrow night, my place," she said without preamble. Jake smiled into the phone. "That sounds a lot like a command." "It is," she replied. "My boss and some of our investors are coming. Casual, but important. I may have told them I'm seeing someone who's a little unconventional." Jake's smile faltered slightly. "Unconventional?" "Authentic. Not just another guy in a Navy suit quoting Forbes articles. You're different, Jake. I want them to meet someone who isn't playing a part." The irony tightened like a knot in his stomach. "I don't know if I'll be any good at dinner parties," he said, only half joking. She laughed. "Just be yourself. That's all I need." He said yes, of course. He always said yes to her. He hung up and stared at the wall for a long moment, trying to picture what version of himself she wanted to show off. He wondered how many more times he could be her authentic boyfriend, without telling her that his entire presence in her world was based on a misunderstanding he had never corrected. Friday came fast. Jake dropped Lily off at Beth's place with a bag of overnight clothes and a stack of coloring books. Beth watched him fuss with his collar in her doorway. "You going to tell her?" she asked, not unkindly. "I keep meaning to." Beth folded her arms. "You're in deep, Jake. The longer you wait, the harder it'll hit her. Better to get it done before someone else does it for you." He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Emily's apartment was exactly what he had imagined. Light-filled, full of books and clean lines, with small personal touches tucked everywhere. A framed photo of her parents in black and white. A single Polaroid of her and a college roommate laughing with smudged eyeliner. The scent of roasted garlic drifted in from the kitchen, and soft jazz played low in the background. She met him at the door, barefoot and flushed from the oven's heat. "You're early," she said, smiling. "Wanted to help. Then you can open wine and try not to judge my homemade flatbread." Guests trickled in over the next hour. Emily's boss, Mark, was older, sharp-eyed, and suspiciously quiet. His wife was charming and curious, asking Jake polite questions about the consulting world. Jake found ways to answer them without lying, but also without clarifying. He spoke about outdoor spaces and design theory, about how people were happier when surrounded by living things. Emily watched him as he spoke, her expression full of pride. That only made it harder. He noticed the tension begin when another guest arrived late. A woman named Tessa, who worked with Emily at the firm. She was tall, composed, and had the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. When Emily introduced Jake, Tessa offered her hand and looked him over in one sweeping glance. "So you're the man who stole our strategist's heart," she said. Jake gave a small, polite smile. "Something like that." Emily mentioned you're in design. "What kind of projects do you specialize in?" "Landscape and outdoor consulting," he said. Tessa raised her eyebrows. "Interesting. Do you have a portfolio online? I'd love to see some of your firm's work. What's the name again?" Jake hesitated. "It's just under my name, Mason Consulting and Design." Her expression shifted subtly, but she said nothing else. Instead, she turned to join another conversation. Jake felt a tremor of unease he could not quite place. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of wine and conversation. Emily pulled him into the kitchen between courses, wrapping her arms around his waist. "You're killing it," she whispered. "Even Mark likes you, and he hates everyone." Jake leaned down and kissed her forehead. Glad I passed the test. Later, as they said their goodbyes to the final guests, Emily closed the door with a satisfied sigh. Success, she declared. But Jake was still watching the door, replaying Tessa's expression. You're quiet, Emily said. Just tired. She studied him, then smiled. Well, next time it'll be just the two of us. No questions, no investors. Jake nodded. I'd like that. The next morning, while clearing out his inbox, Jake noticed a new email address in his business contact form submissions. It was simple, with no subject. The message read, just wondering what kind of CEO doesn't have a LinkedIn page, a registered LLC, or a website, or maybe you just use different names. Jake stared at the screen for a long time. The sender was anonymous, but he already knew who had written it. Tessa. He closed his laptop and leaned back in the chair. His lie was cracking at the edges, and someone else had started tugging at the threads. If Emily didn't hear the truth from him soon, she was going to hear it from someone who would not be kind about it. And when that happened, no amount of soft smiles or warm dinners would be able to protect what they had built. The truth was coming, whether he invited it or not. And the fallout, Jake knew, would be entirely his fault. Emily sat at her desk, staring at the same slide for 5 full minutes, before realizing she had not absorbed a single word. Her coffee had long gone cold, the city outside her office window shimmered with late morning light, and her calendar kept blinking reminders she ignored. Meetings, calls, a campaign review with the social team. All of it waited, but her mind refused to follow. She leaned back in her chair and rubbed her temples. The week had been a blur of late nights and perfect moments. Jake had been at the center of every one. He made her laugh even when she was exhausted. He listened when she vented. He brought her flowers once, not roses or anything expected, but wildflowers in a paper-wrapped bundle that he said reminded him of her. It had been years since she had felt this sure about someone. And yet, something was bothering her. It started small. The inconsistencies. She brushed them off at first. Jake did not talk about his business the way most consultants did. He never used buzzwords or talked about scaling or venture partnerships. He described things in tactile terms, as if he were building them with his hands. And when she asked for his website, he told her it was under construction. She did not press him. He always seemed sincere. Then there were his hands. They were strong and worn, the kind that belonged to someone who worked outside. He smelled like cedar sometimes. She had always liked that about him. But she had never met a CEO who smelled like lumber. This morning, it all came back to her as she reached for a scarf and found a bit of grit on it. She could not explain it, just the texture of dirt still clinging faintly to the fabric. It made her pause. It made her remember the day she first met him, when his shirt had been stained with coffee and he had not seemed the least bit flustered to be caught wearing jeans outside a skyscraper. Her phone buzzed. A message from Tessa. Hey, got a minute? Need to flag something. Private. Emily frowned. She did not particularly like Tessa. She was competitive, guarded, the type of woman who always knew more than she let on. Still, Emily texted back. Swing by. A moment later, Tessa stepped into her office and closed the door behind her. I debated whether to even bring this up, she said, sliding into the chair across from Emily. But I like you, and I don't want you to get embarrassed. Emily's stomach sank. What is it? Tessa looked almost apologetic, which only made it worse. I did a little digging. About Jake. Emily straightened. Why? Because you introduced him to half our executive team last week and talked about him like he was your partner. If he's the real deal, great, but he's not who he says he is. Emily narrowed her eyes. What do you think he said? Consulting and design? I checked. There's no record of his company. No website, no LLC registered in state, no LinkedIn presence. And when I tried to match his name to contracts or projects in corporate design, I found nothing. You ran a background check? Emily asked sharply. Tessa raised her hands slightly. Not formally. Just what anyone could do. Look, I'm not saying he's dangerous, but I am saying he's hiding something, and I thought you should know before this becomes a bigger deal. Emily sat still for a long moment after Tessa left. The silence in her office felt suddenly different, as though the air had shifted. Doubt crept in slowly, curling at the edge of her thoughts. She hated how it made her feel. Like she was naive, like she had been fooled. She opened her browser and typed his name. Jake Mason. Mason Consulting and Design. She found nothing that confirmed his claims. No business listing, no digital footprint beyond a generic email address. She scrolled further and found something buried deeper. A permit filed under his name for landscape work on a commercial rooftop. The address was familiar. The Halberton Building. She stared at the screen, her pulse beginning to throb in her ears. That was where she had met him. The realization landed hard, pulling all the earlier questions into sharp focus. He had been working there. Not visiting, not consulting. He was the landscaper. Her chest tightened. She reached for her phone, then stopped. She could not decide if she wanted to call him or scream. By the time the end of the workday arrived, she had convinced herself not to jump to conclusions. She would ask him. She would look him in the eye and give him the chance to explain. Maybe there was some misunderstanding. Maybe he had started out in landscaping and shifted into something else. She did not know. All she knew was that her trust was bruising, and she needed answers before it broke completely. That night, Jake came over late, after putting Lily to bed. He looked tired but happy to see her, and he leaned in to kiss her before pausing at the look on her face. Everything okay? Emily sat on the couch, her arms folded. We need to talk. Jake stood frozen for a second, before slowly nodding. All right. She waited. He didn't sit down. You've told me you're a consultant, that you run your own design firm, she said. He nodded again, slower this time. Yes. What kind of design firm? Outdoor spaces. I focus on natural environments, gardens, rooftop installations, that kind of thing. So landscaping? He hesitated. Yes, but more than just cutting grass. I design sustainable spaces. It's not just a crew and a lawnmower. You let me introduce you to my boss as a fellow executive. I called you a CEO in front of people who matter in my career, and you didn't correct me. He rubbed his jaw, the weariness seeping into his features. I never told you I was a CEO. You didn't have to. You let me believe it. You dressed the part. You borrowed a suit and stood beside me like it was the truth. He looked away. I didn't plan it that way. That first day, you assumed, and I was going to correct you. But then you looked at me like I belonged there, like maybe I was more than what I was. And I wanted to be that, even for a little while. Emily's voice was barely above a whisper. Why didn't you just tell me? Because I didn't think you'd still want me if you knew the truth. The words hung in the room like dust in sunlight. Neither of them moved. Jake finally sat down across from her, not reaching for her, not defending himself further. I work hard, Emily. I raise my daughter alone. I build things with my hands because it's what I know. I don't have a boardroom or a company profile. But I care about what I do. I care about you. She stared at him, trying to reconcile the man she had fallen for with the version that now sat in front of her. He was still Jake. But now, the trust between them felt fractured, as if a fault line had opened. I need time, she said quietly. Jake nodded. I understand. He stood, his shoulders heavy. Before he walked out the door, he turned back. I never lied to hurt you. I just wanted you to see me first, before you judged the rest. Then he left. And Emily sat alone, her heart tangled in questions, unsure if she had lost something real or only the illusion of it. The gala was everything Emily had expected it to be, polished, extravagant, and filled with people who smiled too widely while scanning the room for someone more important. Soft music played under the hum of conversation, and waiters glided by carrying champagne flutes on silver trays. The walls were draped in velvet curtains, and crystal chandeliers shimmered above the crowd like floating constellations. It was the kind of event where image was everything, and even the tiniest crack in presentation could ripple outward. Emily had not planned on going. After Jake left her apartment days ago, she had barely spoken to anyone outside of work. She had told herself she needed time to think, and she had taken it, filling her days with reports and client decks, burying herself in deadlines and fast decisions. But the questions stayed with her, circling in the background. Had Jake betrayed her, or had she chosen to believe something she never truly asked him to confirm? Was he wrong for letting her assume, or was she wrong for not seeing past the image she had built of him? In the end, she had gone to the gala because it was required. Her team was up for an industry award, and Mark had made it clear that her absence would be noticed. So she put on her black satin gown, painted on the kind of smile she had not worn in days, and stepped into the world she used to navigate so easily. She moved through the ballroom with practiced grace, exchanging small talk, thanking people for congratulations, sipping water instead of wine, but even surrounded by familiar faces, she felt out of place. She kept looking at the door as if Jake might walk through it, even though she knew he would never set foot in a room like this again. It wasn't until the awards portion began that the night truly shifted. The MC, a smooth-voiced man in a tailored tuxedo, took the stage and began announcing the categories. Emily clapped at the right times, smiled when the camera panned across her table, and tried not to think about how hollow the applause sounded. When her team won Best Digital Campaign of the Year, she rose with the others and walked to the stage, the flash of cameras blinking in quick succession. Back at the table, her heart thudded for reasons that had nothing to do with awards. She had built a career out of knowing how to read a room, how to read people, how to frame things in a way that made sense to everyone else. But when it came to Jake, all her instincts had faltered. Across the ballroom, she spotted Tessa leaning in close to Mark, whispering something with a smirk. That alone made Emily sit up straighter. She had been avoiding Tessa since their last conversation, partly out of anger, partly out of the worry that she might hear something she could not ignore. Then, during the closing hour of the event, it happened. The MC returned to the mic with a smile, thanking sponsors, cracking a final joke. As the crowd began to shift and people moved toward the exits, a voice called out from near the center of the room. "Well, before everyone goes, maybe we can clear up one last thing." The voice was familiar, too familiar. Emily turned in her seat slowly and saw David, the same man from a few weeks ago, the one who had bristled at Jake's presence and all but interrogated him. He stood now near the front, holding a half-empty drink, the kind of confidence on his face that came from knowing he had a stage. "I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he said loudly, sarcasm creeping into his tone. "And I especially want to give a shout-out to our favorite mystery man, Jake Mason." Several heads turned. Emily froze. "Funny thing, though," David continued. "For a guy with such an impressive resume, there's surprisingly little information out there. No registered business, no client list, no public records of any professional background. And believe me, I looked." Mark stood and said something low to David, trying to calm him, but David brushed him off. "I just think it's important," he said, now facing the crowd more directly, "that when someone walks into rooms like this, we know who they are. Otherwise, what are we doing here? Pretending?" The silence was loud and immediate. Emily felt every eye flick toward her and then away again, as if unsure where to land. She stood slowly, heart pounding, and walked out of the ballroom without saying a word. Outside, the air was cold, and she let it sting her skin. The city lights blurred as her eyes filled. She leaned against the side of the building and drew a shaky breath. She had thought the worst part would be the discovery, but it wasn't. It was the fact that she had cared so much. that even now, humiliated and exposed, she still felt a pang not from the embarrassment, but from missing him. A moment later, she heard someone approach. Jake. He stood just a few feet away, breath visible in the night air. He wore no suit, no tie, just dark jeans and a worn jacket. His expression was calm, but tired. "I didn't know he'd do that," he said quietly. "I never wanted you to get dragged into it." Emily looked at him, her voice brittle. "You let me introduce you to people. You stood there and let them believe you were someone else. You watched me believe it." Jake nodded. "I know, and I hated myself for it every time. But I wanted to be close to you. I thought if you just got to know me, the rest wouldn't matter." "But it does matter," she said, voice rising. "Because trust matters. Because I don't know what was real." He stepped closer. "This was real. Every second. The flowers, the walks. Every time I looked at you like I was seeing something I never thought I'd have again. That was all real. You lied." "I was afraid," he said, voice cracking. "You live in a world where people like me are invisible. I didn't want to disappear before I had a chance." Emily blinked, biting back the tears. She could not decide if she wanted to slap him or kiss him or simply walk away. "I can't do this right now," she said. Jake nodded. He stepped back and gave her space. "I understand." She turned and walked to the street, where a cab was waiting. She got in and closed the door before she could change her mind. Through the window, she saw Jake still standing there, hands in his pockets, watching her go. The car pulled away, and she leaned her head back, closing her eyes. She had wanted something honest. Instead, she had found something complicated, something raw and unfinished. And now she had to decide whether that was something she could live with. The city felt quieter in the weeks that followed, not just in the streets or on the trains, but inside Emily herself. The noise she usually carried, the mental chatter of deadlines, clients, and constant ambition, had dulled into a kind of silence she did not recognize. Her days went on as expected. She rose early, answered emails, attended meetings, and even smiled in all the right moments. But underneath it all, there was a stillness that felt too much like waiting. She had not spoken to Jake since the gala. Every time her phone buzzed, she hoped and feared in equal measure, but he had not reached out. Neither had she. There was too much between them now, not just the lie, but everything it had undone. She had let someone in more deeply than she had intended, and when the foundation shifted, the collapse had not just bruised her pride, had shaken her belief in what she thought she wanted. She told herself it was over, that what had happened with Jake had been brief, intense, and ultimately unsustainable. She told herself she would move on, because that was what she always did, but she could not forget him. She thought of his hands when she dug in her garden one morning, pulling weeds from her balcony pots. She thought of his voice whenever a country song came on the radio. She even dreamed of Lily, a child she had only met in fragments, but who lived in her memory like a story she had once been invited into and then shut out from. And then came the storm. It arrived without much warning. A quick shift in the weather, the kind that catches the city off guard. Rain fell in sheets, and wind lashed through the streets with the sharpness of winter despite the summer calendar. Emily stayed in that night, curled on the couch with a book she could not focus on. Sometime after midnight, the lights flickered and then returned. She slept badly, restless, with unease she could not name. The next morning, she passed by the Halberton building on her way to a client brunch and noticed the yellow caution tape at the side of the entrance. Curious, she paused and looked up. Something about the roofline seemed different. She stepped inside and found the concierge desk unattended, so she made her way to the elevator. She had not been to the rooftop garden in weeks. Her company had once used it for a product shoot, and Emily had fallen in love with it, especially the hidden bench beside the koi pond, where everything felt just a little more peaceful. When she reached the top floor, the elevator opened onto a wet, wind-blown hallway. She stepped onto the rooftop and stopped. The garden had been nearly destroyed. Planters had toppled, and sections of the stone path had come loose. One of the benches had been knocked over completely, and half the koi pond was murky with runoff. Flower beds were smashed, and a tarp whipped noisily in the wind overhead. The damage was worse than she had expected. She stood there, stunned, as the wind tugged at her coat, and then, through the rain-dampened air, she heard a familiar voice. "Careful where you step." She turned. Jake stood at the far end of the garden, kneeling beside an overturned trellis. His jacket was soaked, his hands covered in mud. He looked up at her, startled at first, then simply tired. "Hi," he said quietly. Emily could not speak. She looked at him, really looked, and saw everything she had tried to forget. His eyes held the same steadiness they always had, even now, even after everything. "What are you doing here?" she asked finally. He stood slowly, wiping his hands on a rag he pulled from his pocket. "Fixing it," he said. "You still work here?" He shook his head. "Not anymore, but no one else was going to do it." She stepped further into the garden, careful not to trip over the broken stones. "You're doing this alone?" He nodded. She looked around again. The damage would take days to repair, maybe longer. The garden had been a masterpiece. Now it was a ruin. Yet here he was, still trying to restore it, piece by piece, without asking for help. Jake studied her for a moment, then turned back to his work. "You didn't have to come," he said. "I didn't know you were here," she replied. "I just came to see the garden." He nodded once, then crouched to lift a shattered planter back into place. Emily moved closer, watching as he worked. His movements were slow but sure. He had done this before, countless times. She crouched beside him, reaching for the other side of the planter. He paused but did not stop her. Together, they lifted it into place. "You don't have to help," he said. "I want to," she replied. They worked in silence for a while, cleaning up debris, brushing soil back into beds that had been half washed away. It felt like something more than just manual labor. It felt like a conversation neither of them knew how to start with words. Finally, Emily sat back on her heels and looked at him. "Why did you come back?" she asked. Jake leaned against the edge of a planter, breathing heavily. "Because this place mattered to you," he said. "I remember how your eyes lit up when you first showed me that bench, and I wanted to leave something better than what I broke." She looked down at her hands, still caked with dirt. "You didn't just break the garden, Jake." He nodded. "I know. I don't know if I can trust you," she said. "Not the way I did." "I don't expect you to," he said quietly. "I just want you to know that I'm not pretending anymore. This is who I am. A guy who fixes things when they fall apart, even if he was the one who dropped them in the first place." She looked at him then, and her heart pulled tight. Not because he looked different, but because he looked exactly the same. The man she had fallen for was still there. Worn down, a little broken, but still standing. Jake stood and walked a few paces away, then gestured toward a flower bed he had cleared. "I started something over there," he said. "Didn't know if you'd see it." Emily rose and followed him. In the center of the bed, freshly turned soil curved into the shape of a heart, and inside it, in careful lines of white petals, he had spelled out 3 words. "I'm still me." Emily pressed a hand to her mouth, blinking against the sudden rush of emotion. "I wanted you to remember," Jake said. "Before the suits and the assumptions, before everything fell apart, that version of me wasn't fake. It just wasn't complete. But I'm still that guy. I always was." The words settled in her like rain soaking into dry ground. She did not answer right away. Instead, she walked into the flower bed, knelt beside the message, and slowly began to help him press the petals more securely into place. And Jake, saying nothing, knelt beside her again. The wind had settled by the time they finished the garden. The chaos that had swept through days earlier was gone. leaving behind a calm that did not feel empty. Instead, it felt earned. Earned through bruised hearts, stubborn silence, and two people finally meeting each other without the noise of expectations. Emily stood at the edge of the rooftop path, her hair pulled back loosely, her hands streaked with soil. The flower bed still bore the shape of the heart Jake had made, its white petals glowing softly in the fading light. She had not said much since reading the words, but she had stayed. That, more than anything, meant something. Jake worked quietly beside her, brushing dirt from the stones, realigning them with care. He kept waiting for her to leave, to say goodbye, to tell him this had been a nice gesture but not enough. Instead, she helped. She stayed. She knelt beside him like they had done this 100 times before, and he let himself believe, just for a while, that maybe it meant she still saw something in him. When they finished, she stood and looked over the garden. It was still a bit wild, with corners that needed replanting and sections of mulch that had washed away, but it was standing again, restored, if not perfect. She turned to him finally. "You didn't have to do all this," she said. Jake wiped his hands on the back of his jeans and shrugged. "I did, not for credit, not even to be forgiven. I just couldn't walk away from something I helped build." She studied his face for a long moment. He did not look away. He had nothing left to hide. He had no lines rehearsed, no story polished for her approval. He was just Jake, the way he had always been before things got complicated. "You know," she said softly, "I thought I wanted someone who matched my world, someone who understood the language of corporate meetings and investor calls, someone who could walk into a room like that gala and belong." "And now?" he asked. She exhaled, slow and steady. "Now I think I just want someone who doesn't run when things get hard, someone who shows up with dirty hands and does the work, even if nobody's watching." Jake felt the words settle into his chest, heavy with hope. "I don't have a suit that fits," he said. "I don't know the right forks to use at fancy dinners, but I know how to build something from nothing. I know how to hold on when it matters." "I know," she said. "That's why I came." They stood together as the last light of day slid behind the skyline. The hum of the city below was distant, and for a moment the rooftop felt like its own world. The garden was quiet again, the plants swaying gently in the breeze, as if recognizing their caretakers. He hesitated, then reached for her hand. She let him. The warmth of her fingers, the easy way they fit into his, undid something in him. He had waited for this without expecting it, had wanted it without demanding. He had stood in the truth and let her choose. And now she was here. "I missed you," he said. Emily looked at him, eyes bright with something softer than tears. "I missed you too, but I needed space. I needed to understand why it hurt so much, and I think it was because I saw something real and then felt like it was pulled out from under me. I never wanted to fool you. I know. But next time, don't let me fill in the blanks. Just give me the truth, even if you think I won't want it." Jake nodded slowly. "Deal." There was silence again, but now it felt whole, comfortable. The kind that follows a conversation where everything has finally been said. She tilted her head slightly. "So, are you going to invite me to meet Lily? Or are you going to keep pretending she doesn't exist just to impress me?" Jake's laugh came suddenly, almost like relief. "She's been asking about you. She keeps drawing these stick-figure families where you have pink shoes and superhero arms." Emily smiled. "Sounds about right. I can bring her by this weekend, if you want." "I do." The words felt simple, steady. They had started out in chaos. A spilled coffee, a mistaken identity, a whirlwind that could have ended in resentment or distance. But here they were, after all of it, finding their footing not in the fantasy, but in something better. Honesty. Jake walked her down from the rooftop, their hands still joined. They stepped into the elevator, and she leaned lightly against his shoulder. He felt the tension, leaving his body in waves. For the first time in weeks, he was not bracing for the end. Outside, the air had cooled, and the sky was darkening into deep blue. He walked her to her car, not rushing the goodbye. She turned before getting in. "Do you still have that card I gave you?" she asked. Jake smiled. "The coffee voucher? Yeah, it's in my wallet. You never used it." "I didn't want to cash it in until I knew if we were real." Emily reached into her purse and pulled out a new one. This one was just a blank note card. She took a pen from the car console and scribbled something on it. Then she handed it to him. He looked down. It read, "Dinner, your place. Tomorrow, bring Lily, and a bottle of something cheap. I'll bring dessert." He looked up, and she was already sliding into the driver's seat. She rolled the window down. "You'd better not burn dinner," she said. He laughed. "No promises." She smiled once more before driving away, her taillights vanishing into the evening traffic. Jake stood there for a long moment, the card still in his hand. The streetlights flickered on above him, casting soft golden pools on the sidewalk. He tucked the note into his back pocket and turned toward his truck. Back home, Lily was already in her pajamas, bouncing on the couch with a book in her hand. "Daddy, I made a drawing," she said as he stepped inside. He picked her up and kissed the top of her head. "Yeah? What's it of?" She held it out proudly. 3 stick figures, one tall, one short, and one with a triangle dress and a huge smile. Above them, a big pink heart. "Is that Emily?" he asked. Lily nodded. "Can she come over again?" Jake looked at the picture, then at his daughter. "She's coming for dinner tomorrow," he said. Lily grinned and ran off to find crayons. Jake stood in the middle of the room, the soft hum of the city outside the windows, the scent of homegrown basil from the kitchen windowsill. Everything had changed. Everything had broken. And yet, everything had begun again. Not with a lie, not with the fantasy of a man he never was, but with the truth, with dirt under his nails and love in his hands, and someone who chose to love him not in spite of it, but because of it.